Captain David Rodriguez walked into the massive council chamber, his heart beating fast. The room was huge, with walls made of some kind of glowing crystal that showed the stars outside. Alien beings from dozens of different worlds sat around a circular table that seemed to float in the air. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that David had to stop himself from staring. This was it, the moment that would decide Earth's future in the galaxy. After years of first contact and careful negotiations, humanity finally had a chance to join the Galactic Alliance. But there was one condition. David had to choose a bride from among the alien princesses, forming a political marriage that would seal the partnership between Earth and her new allies. The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing 7 different alien women. Each one represented a different world, a different set of resources, and a different level of power that could help or destroy humanity's chances among the stars. "Captain Rodriguez," spoke Ambassador Chen, the senior Earth diplomat who had been working on this deal for 3 years. "These are your options. Choose carefully. This decision will affect every human being alive today and all the generations that come after us." David studied each profile carefully. Princess Zara of Voltron appeared first. She was tall and strong, with golden skin that seemed to glow under the lights. Her world controlled the largest military fleet in this sector of the galaxy. Marry her, and Earth would have protection from any enemy that might threaten humanity's expansion into space. The military advisors had been pushing for this choice for months. Next came Princess Lyra of the Crystal Empire. Her people controlled the richest mining operations in known space. Diamonds, rare metals, and energy crystals that could power Earth's cities for 1,000 years. The economic team loved this option. With her resources, humanity could build anything they needed to thrive among the stars. Princess Nova of the Tech Worlds was third. Her species had invented faster-than-light communication and weapons that could destroy entire planets. The scientists were practically begging David to choose her. With their technology, Earth could leap forward by centuries in just a few years. The other princesses were equally impressive. Princess Stella commanded respect across dozens of worlds through her diplomatic skills. Princess Luna's people controlled the major trade routes that connected different parts of the galaxy. Princess Terra had access to the most advanced medical knowledge in known space, promising to end disease and extend human life far beyond anything currently possible. But then David saw the 7th option, and something inside him went quiet. Princess Kira of Ethan looked nothing like the others. Where they were tall and strong and confident, she was small and seemed almost fragile. Her skin was pale blue and so thin you could almost see through it. Her world was dying, its sun growing dim and cold. Her people were scattered across the galaxy as refugees, with no permanent home and no real power. The display showed her planet's statistics, and they were heartbreaking. Population dropping every year, no military to speak of, no valuable resources, no advanced technology, no trade agreements or diplomatic influence. By every measure that mattered to the Council, Princess Kira had absolutely nothing to offer. David could hear whispers starting around the room. The other human delegates were looking at him with worried expressions. They had spent years preparing for this moment, studying each option, planning for every possible choice except this one. "David," Ambassador Chen said quietly, trying not to let the aliens hear. "Please tell me you're not seriously considering the Ethon option. Her world will be completely uninhabitable within 10 years. Her people are basically homeless. There's no strategic advantage there at all." General Morrison, the military representative, was less subtle. "Son, I've seen the reports. The Ethonians can barely defend themselves against space pirates. How are they supposed to help us if we face a real threat? This isn't charity work. This is about humanity's survival." Dr. Elizabeth Park, the chief scientist, shook her head. Their technology is actually behind ours in most areas. They don't even have proper space travel anymore. Most of them hitch rides on other species' ships just to get around. I don't understand what you could possibly be thinking." David looked around the room at all the alien delegates watching him. Some seemed curious about what the human would choose. Others looked bored, as if the outcome was obvious. A few were already whispering among themselves, probably making bets about which powerful princess would soon have a human husband. But when David looked at Princess Kira's image again, something felt different. Maybe it was the way she held herself, with dignity despite having lost so much. Maybe it was something in her eyes that suggested there was more to her story than what appeared in the official records. Or maybe it was just a feeling he couldn't explain, like when you know someone is telling the truth even when their words don't make complete sense. "I choose Princess Kira of Ethon," David announced clearly, his voice carrying across the chamber. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The human delegation looked like they had been struck by lightning. Ambassador Chen actually dropped his data pad. General Morrison's face turned red with anger. Dr. Park looked like she might faint. The alien delegates seemed just as shocked. Several of them started speaking at once in languages David didn't recognize, but the translation devices picked up. Words like foolish and strategic disaster and human stupidity. Even Princess Kira herself appeared stunned when she received the news. Through the communication link, her voice was soft and confused. "I don't understand. Captain Rodriguez, are you certain? I have nothing to give to your people. My world is dying. My people are scattered and weak. Surely one of my sisters would serve your interests much better." The room erupted in heated discussions. Other alien leaders were demanding to know if this was some kind of human joke or if David had been given incorrect information about the situation. The powerful princesses who had been passed over looked insulted and angry. Ambassador Chen grabbed David's arm and pulled him aside. "What are you doing? This is insane. Do you have any idea what you've just thrown away? Princess Zara could have given us military protection. Princess Lyra could have made us the richest species in the galaxy. Princess Nova could have advanced our technology by hundreds of years. And you choose the one princess who brings absolutely nothing to the table?" David looked at the chaos he had created, then back at Princess Kira's image on the display. She was still there, still looking confused and worried, still seeming small and fragile compared to all the power and wealth and strength he had just turned down. "I know exactly what I'm doing," David said quietly. "And I'd like to request a private meeting with Princess Kira as soon as possible." Ambassador Chen stared at him like he had gone completely crazy. "A private meeting? David, you just made the worst strategic decision in human history, and now you want to have a chat with the princess who brings nothing but problems? What could you possibly hope to accomplish?" David smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "Trust me, there's more to this than any of you realize. Princess Kira and her people aren't what they seem to be, and neither is the threat that's coming for all of us." The room fell silent as everyone tried to understand what the human captain could possibly mean. What threat? What did he know that they didn't? And why would anyone choose the weakest option when so much was at stake? David didn't answer their questions. Instead, he simply requested that the meeting with Princess Kira be arranged as quickly as possible. He had a lot to explain, and not much time to do it, because while everyone else was focused on the obvious choices, David had been paying attention to something much more important, something that would soon change everything they thought they knew about strength, weakness, and what it really meant to protect the people you cared about. 2 days later, David found himself sitting in a small, quiet room aboard the diplomatic station. The walls were a soft silver color that seemed to glow gently, and through the large window he could see ships from dozens of different worlds, docked at the massive space station. But his attention was focused entirely on the woman sitting across from him. Princess Kira looked even smaller in person than she had in the holographic display. She was barely 5 feet tall, with delicate features and that strange pale blue skin that seemed almost see-through in certain lights. Her large eyes were a deep violet color, and they held a sadness that made David's chest tighten. She wore simple white robes that seemed to float around her thin frame, and when she moved, it was with a grace that reminded him of water flowing over stones. "Captain Rodriguez," she said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that the translation devices couldn't quite capture. "I have been thinking about your choice for 2 days now, and I still cannot understand it. Please, I must ask you again. Why did you choose me? What could you possibly hope to gain from an alliance with my people?" David leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Up close, he could see that her apparent fragility was something more complex. There was strength in the way she held herself, a quiet dignity that spoke of someone who had faced terrible losses and kept going anyway. "Princess, before I answer that question, I need to ask you something. What do you know about the space between the galaxies? The dark regions where no stars shine and no planets exist?" Kira's expression changed slightly. A flicker of something, fear maybe, or recognition, passed across her features. "The void regions? They are empty space. Nothing lives there. Nothing can live there. Why do you ask?" David pulled out a small device and activated it. A 3-dimensional map appeared in the air between them, showing their local galaxy cluster. But instead of the usual bright points of light representing stars and planets, this map showed something else. Dark shapes moving through the empty spaces between galaxies, like shadows creeping across the universe. "What you're looking at," David said quietly, "are long-range sensor readings from Earth's deep space monitoring stations. We've been tracking these objects for the past 8 months. They're not natural phenomena. They're not ships or planets or any kind of matter that we understand. They're something else entirely." Kira stared at the map, her violet eyes growing wide. The dark shapes seemed to pulse and shift, and even though it was just a holographic display, there was something deeply unsettling about watching them move. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Nothing can survive in the void between galaxies. The cold, the radiation, the complete absence of any energy source. It would destroy any living thing instantly." "That's what we thought too," David replied. "But these things aren't just surviving out there. They're thriving, and they're heading this way." He manipulated the display, showing the predicted paths of the dark objects. All of them were converging on their galaxy, moving at incredible speeds that defied everything scientists thought they knew about space travel. "We call them the Void Wraiths," David continued, "and based on our calculations, they'll reach the outer systems of our galaxy within 18 months. Kira was silent for a long moment, staring at the display with an expression that had gone from confusion to something approaching terror. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The Shadow Eaters," she said. "The old stories my grandmother used to tell, but they were just myths. Ancient legends that my people told to explain the darkness between the stars." David felt his pulse quicken. "Tell me about these stories." Kira stood up and walked to the window, her movements seeming even more fluid and graceful than before. "Long ago, before my people came to Ethan, before we even had names for the stars, there were creatures that lived in the spaces between spaces. They fed on light itself, on energy, on the very possibility of existence. When they came to a world, they would consume everything, not just the people or the buildings or the planet, but the light of its sun, the warmth of its core, even the memories of those who had lived there." She turned back to David, and he was startled to see tears in her violet eyes. "The stories said that my ancestors fought them once, long ago, but the cost was so terrible that those who survived chose to forget. They scattered across the galaxy, settling on different worlds, letting the memories fade into legend." David activated another function on his device, and the display changed to show archaeological data. 6 months ago, we found ruins on your homeworld, ancient structures buried deep beneath the surface. older than any civilization we've ever discovered. The technology we found there doesn't match anything your people use now, but it does match some of the energy signatures we're detecting from the void wraiths. Kira sank back into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. You're saying that my people, my weak, scattered, dying people, once fought these creatures? I'm saying more than that, David replied gently. I'm saying that your people didn't just fight them. You won, and I think that's why you seem so fragile to the rest of us. Your bodies, your entire species, evolved to survive something that nothing else in the galaxy could survive. He showed her medical scans, genetic analyses, energy readings that had taken Earth's best scientists months to understand. Your people don't just exist in normal space like the rest of us. You're partially phased into other dimensions, other layers of reality. That's why your skin looks translucent. That's why you seem fragile. You're not entirely here in the same way the rest of us are. Kira stared at the data, her hands shaking slightly. But if this is true, why don't we remember? Why don't we know how to use these abilities? Because, David said softly, forgetting was how you survived. The trauma of fighting the void wraiths was so severe that your ancestors chose to suppress the memories, to let the knowledge fade rather than pass on the horror of what they had faced. But the genetic changes, the dimensional phasing, the ability to exist between spaces, those things stayed in your DNA. David leaned forward, his voice urgent now. Princess Kira, everyone thinks I chose you because I made a mistake. They think I'm crazy for picking the weakest alliance when Earth needs strength. But they're wrong. I didn't choose the weakest option. I chose the only option that gives us a chance to survive what's coming. Kira looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was something other than sadness in her eyes. It was small, just a tiny spark, but it was there. You really believe that my people can fight these creatures again? David nodded. I believe that your people are the only ones who can fight them. The question is, do you believe it? Kira was quiet for a long time, staring out at the stars visible through the window. Finally, she spoke, her voice stronger than it had been since the conversation began. If what you're saying is true, then I need to contact the other Ethonian communities scattered across the galaxy. I need to find the old stories, the forgotten songs, anything that might help us remember what we once knew. David smiled. Now you're starting to understand why I chose you. But Captain, Kira said, turning back to him with worry in her eyes, even if we can recover these abilities, even if we can remember how to fight in the spaces between spaces, I am still just one person, and my people are still scattered and few. How can we possibly stand against something that threatens the entire galaxy? David's smile grew wider. Princess, you're thinking like someone who spent her whole life believing she was weak. It's time to start thinking like someone whose ancestors saved the universe. Over the next week, David and Kira worked together in a secure research facility deep inside the diplomatic station. The room was filled with computers, holographic displays, and ancient artifacts that Earth's archaeological teams had discovered on Ethon before the planet became too dangerous to visit. Dr. Helen Carter, Earth's leading expert on alien biology, had joined them along with Professor James Wright, who specialized in ancient civilizations. At first, both scientists had been skeptical about David's theory. But as they examined the evidence, their doubts began to fade. This is incredible, Dr. Carter said, studying genetic samples from Kira's people. Look at these cellular structures. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. The DNA isn't just storing genetic information. It's actually existing in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Professor Wright was equally amazed by the archaeological findings. These ruins we found on Ethon are at least 1 million years old, but the technology is more advanced than anything we have today. And look at these symbols carved into the walls. They match perfectly with the energy patterns we're detecting from the approaching void wraiths. Kira sat quietly, absorbing all of this information. She had contacted every Athonian community she could find, asking the elders to share their oldest stories and songs. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. "My people have been having the same dreams for generations," she told David one evening as they reviewed the collected folklore. "Dreams of shadows that eat light, of battles fought in places that exist between reality and nothing. We always thought they were just nightmares caused by our difficult lives as refugees." David pulled up a star chart showing the locations of various Athonian settlements across the galaxy. "But look at where your people chose to settle. Every single community is located near what we call dimensional weak points, places where the barrier between normal space and other dimensions is naturally thin." "You think we were unconsciously drawn to these places?" Kira asked. "I think your ancestors programmed your species to seek out these locations," David replied. "They knew that someday your people might need to access those other dimensions again. They were preparing for the return of the Void Wraiths, even though they chose to forget the conscious knowledge of what they were preparing for." Dr. Carter approached them with a tablet showing brain scan results. "Princess Kira, we need to try something. Based on these genetic markers, you should be able to consciously control your dimensional phasing, but it's going to require you to tap into parts of your mind that have been dormant your entire life." Kira looked nervous. "What do you mean by dimensional phasing?" Professor Wright activated a holographic display showing complex mathematical equations. "Think of reality like a building with many floors. Most species can only exist on one floor at a time, but your people can exist on multiple floors simultaneously. That's why you appear translucent to us. We're only seeing the part of you that exists on our floor of reality." "The Void Wraiths travel between these floors," David added. "They attack from dimensions where normal matter and energy can't reach them. But if you can learn to phase between dimensions consciously, you can fight them on their own level." Kira stood up and walked to the center of the room. "How do I begin?" Dr. Carter consulted her readings. "The ancient texts mention something called the Song of Between. According to the stories your people shared, it was a melody that helped your ancestors shift between dimensional states." "I know that song," Kira said suddenly, her eyes widening. "My grandmother used to hum it when she thought no one was listening. She said it was something her grandmother taught her, but she never knew why it felt so important." "Can you remember it?" David asked gently. Kira closed her eyes and began to hum a melody that seemed to vibrate through the air in strange ways. As she hummed, something extraordinary began to happen. Her already translucent skin began to shimmer, and parts of her body started to fade in and out of visibility. "Incredible," Dr. Carter whispered, watching her instruments. "She's actually shifting between dimensional phases. The energy readings are off the charts." But then Kira suddenly stopped humming and collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. "I can't," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It hurts too much. It feels like my entire body is being torn apart and put back together." David knelt beside her, offering his hand for support. "The first time is always the hardest. Your body isn't used to consciously controlling something it's been doing unconsciously for your entire life." "But I could feel them," Kira whispered, her voice filled with fear. "When I shifted, I could sense the Void Wraiths out there in the darkness between galaxies. They're not just hungry, they're angry. They remember my people. They remember being defeated before." Professor Wright looked up from his analysis of the dimensional readings. "Princess, what you just accomplished should be impossible according to everything we know about physics. If you can learn to control this ability fully, and if you can teach others of your people to do the same, you might actually be able to stop these creatures." "But I'm just one person," Kira said, struggling to stand. "Even if I master this power, even if I can convince other Ethonians to try, we're scattered across hundreds of worlds. Most of us have never even met each other." David helped her to a chair and sat down beside her. "That's where the political marriage comes in. As my wife, you won't just be a princess of a dying world. You'll be an ambassador with the full backing of Earth and the Galactic Alliance. You'll have the resources and authority to gather your people, to help them remember what they once were. And, Dr. Carter added, you'll have the best scientists from dozens of worlds helping you understand and develop these abilities. We can build training facilities, develop techniques to make the dimensional shifting less painful, create support systems for Ethonians who are learning to use their inherited powers. Kira was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than before, though still trembling slightly. In the old stories, there was a cost to fighting the Shadow Eaters. Many of our warriors never returned from the battles in the between spaces. Others came back changed, unable to fully exist in normal reality anymore. My ancestors chose to forget because the price of remembering was so high. David leaned forward. Kira, I won't lie to you. This is going to be dangerous. Some of your people might not survive the training. Others might be lost in the dimensional spaces between reality. But if we don't try, if we don't fight, then everything dies. Every world, every species, every star in the galaxy. Kira looked around the room at the faces of the scientists who had dedicated themselves to understanding her people's hidden nature. She thought about the scattered Ethonian communities, living as refugees and believing themselves to be weak and worthless. She thought about the approaching darkness that would consume everything she had ever cared about. My grandmother always said that the Song of Between was really a song of hope, she said finally. She said it reminded us that even in the darkest places, even in the spaces where nothing should be able to exist, life finds a way to continue. She stood up slowly, her posture straighter than David had ever seen it. Captain Rodriguez, I accept your proposal. Not just the marriage, but everything that comes with it. I will gather my people. I will help them remember what we once were, and I will lead them into battle against the darkness, no matter what the cost. David smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Now you're starting to sound like the leader your people need. But first, Kira said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time since he'd known her, I need to learn how to shift between dimensions without feeling like I'm dying. I have a feeling that's going to be important. 3 months had passed since David and Kira's wedding ceremony, a simple but meaningful event that had been broadcast across the galaxy. What most viewers didn't know was that immediately after the celebration, the real work had begun. The Galactic Alliance had provided a massive training facility on Nexus Prime, a planet specifically chosen because it sat at the intersection of multiple dimensional weak points. Kira stood in the center of the main training hall, surrounded by nearly 200 Ethonians who had answered her call. Some had traveled for weeks to get here, leaving behind jobs and homes on distant worlds. Others had been living as nomads in space, drifting from system to system with no real purpose, until they received her message. I know this is difficult, Kira said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced sound system. I know that what I'm asking you to do goes against everything we've been taught about ourselves. For generations, we've believed that we were weak, that we were refugees with nothing to offer the galaxy. An elderly Ethonian named Elder Thane raised his hand. His skin was even more translucent than Kira's, and his movements were slow and careful. Princess, with respect, many of us have tried the dimensional exercises you've taught us, but the pain is incredible. Yesterday, young Zara attempted the full phase shift and collapsed. She's still in the medical bay. Kira nodded gravely. I understand your concerns, Elder Thane, but look around this room. 3 months ago, none of us could consciously phase between dimensions at all. Now, half of our people can manage partial shifts, and dozens can maintain full dimensional awareness for several minutes at a time. She gestured to a young man standing near the front of the group. Kai, would you show everyone what you accomplished yesterday? Kai stepped forward nervously. He was barely 20 years old and had spent most of his life working as a maintenance worker on cargo ships. But as he began to hum the Song of Between, his body started to shimmer and fade. Within moments, he had completely disappeared from normal vision, existing entirely in the dimensional space between realities. "Can everyone hear me?" Kai's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The assembled Athonians gasped and murmured in amazement. Most had never seen anyone achieve such a complete dimensional shift. "Now watch this," Kai continued. Still invisible, he moved around the room, and everyone could track his progress by the way objects began to shift and change as he interacted with them from the other dimension. "I can touch things that exist in multiple dimensional phases, but normal matter can't affect me at all." When Kai phased back into normal space, appearing suddenly in the center of the room, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Dr. Carter, who had been monitoring the demonstration with her equipment, approached the group with a tablet full of readings. What Kai just demonstrated would have been impossible for any other known species. He existed completely outside normal space-time. For over 5 minutes, maintained full consciousness and control, and suffered no apparent physical stress. But it wasn't always easy, Kai admitted, rubbing his arms where faint blue marks were visible on his skin. "The first time I tried this, I thought I was going to die. It felt like every molecule in my body was being stretched in different directions. But Princess Kira taught me how to embrace the sensation instead of fighting it." David entered the hall carrying urgent-looking documents. His expression was serious as he approached Kira. "We've got news from the outer monitoring stations. The Void Wraiths have reached the edge of our galaxy. They've already consumed 3 uninhabited star systems." The mood in the room immediately shifted from excitement to fear. Several of the younger Athonians moved closer together, seeking comfort from their companions. "How much time do we have?" Kira asked, though from David's expression she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. "Based on their current speed and direction, they'll reach the first inhabited systems within 6 weeks. The Galactic Defense Fleet is mobilizing, but—" David paused, looking around at the assembled Athonians. "The fleet commanders are asking for a demonstration. They want to see proof that your people can actually fight these creatures before they commit their forces to a battle plan that depends on abilities they don't understand." Elder Thane stepped forward. "Princess, perhaps we should tell the fleet commanders that we need more time. Many of our people are still struggling with basic dimensional awareness. We're not ready for combat." "With respect, Elder," said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Luna, a middle-aged Athonian who had arrived just 2 days earlier. "I've been listening to everyone talk about how we're not ready, how we need more time, how this is too dangerous. But I've also been having the dreams." The room fell silent. Luna continued, her voice growing stronger. "The dreams where I see the Shadow Eaters consuming entire worlds. The dreams where I watch civilizations that have existed for millions of years simply cease to exist. In those dreams, I see what happens if we fail." She walked to the center of the room, standing beside Kira. "I lost my family when our homeworld started dying. I've spent 30 years believing that I was worthless, that my people had nothing left to contribute to the galaxy. But now I understand that everything we've suffered, everything we've lost, was preparing us for this moment." Luna began to hum the Song of Between, and her body immediately started to phase between dimensions. But unlike the others, she didn't struggle or show signs of pain. Instead, she seemed to flow naturally between the different layers of reality. "Can you feel that?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely as she spoke from multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. "There's something else out there, something moving through the spaces between spaces." Dr. Carter's equipment started beeping frantically. "Princess, the readings are incredible. Luna isn't just phasing between dimensions. She's actually sensing the Void Wraiths from here. That should be impossible across such a vast distance." Luna phased back to normal space, but her eyes remained distant and focused on something only she could see. They know we're here. They remember us. And they're afraid. Afraid? David asked, surprised. These creatures have been consuming entire star systems. What could they possibly be afraid of? Us, Luna replied simply. They're afraid of us, because they remember what happened the last time our people fought them. They remember losing. Kira felt something shift inside her, a sensation like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Everyone, I want you to try something. Instead of thinking about dimensional shifting as something painful that we have to endure, I want you to think about it as coming home. This is what we were born to do. This is what our bodies and minds were designed for. One by one, the Athonians in the room began to hum the song of between, and one by one they began to phase between dimensions. But this time, instead of the usual struggle and pain, there was something different. There was recognition, like muscles remembering how to move after a long sleep. Within minutes, nearly half the room had achieved some level of dimensional phasing. The air itself seemed to shimmer and vibrate with energies that normal instruments could barely detect. David watched in amazement as the Athonians transformed before his eyes. These weren't the scattered refugees he had first met. These were the descendants of warriors who had once saved the galaxy from an impossible threat. Princess, he said quietly to Kira, I think you have your demonstration. And I think the Galactic Defense Fleet is about to learn that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is the one that everyone thinks is broken. Kira looked around at her people, no longer seeing weakness and loss, but potential and hope. Contact the fleet commanders, she said. Tell them that the Athonians are ready to show them what we can do, and tell them to prepare for a battle unlike anything they've ever imagined. The awakening had begun, and with it, the galaxy's last hope for survival. The final battle came faster than anyone expected. Only 3 weeks after the Athonians had demonstrated their abilities to the Galactic Defense Fleet, emergency sirens began wailing across every inhabited system in the galaxy. The Void Wraiths had accelerated their approach, moving through space at speeds that defied all known laws of physics. David stood on the bridge of the flagship Harmony, watching the main display screen with a mixture of awe and terror. The approaching darkness wasn't just empty space. It was something that seemed to devour light itself. Stars that had shone for billions of years simply vanished as the Void Wraiths passed through their systems. Captain, called Commander Blake. From the communications station, we're receiving reports from the outer defense perimeter. The enemy has reached the Centauri system. All contact with the defense platforms has been lost. Admiral Foster, the fleet commander, looked grim as he studied the tactical displays. How long until they reach the core worlds? At their current rate of advance, 18 hours, came the reply from the navigation officer. David felt his stomach clench. 18 hours to save everything that mattered. He looked across the bridge to where Kira stood with her dimensional sensing equipment. Her eyes closed in deep concentration. Even from a distance, he could see the strain on her face as she reached out with her consciousness to track the approaching threat. Kira, he said gently, approaching her station. What are you sensing? She opened her violet eyes, and David was surprised to see not fear, but determination. They're different than I expected, she said quietly. The ancient stories made them sound like mindless destroyers, but they're not. They're intelligent, they're organized, and they're definitely angry about something. Angry about what? Before Kira could answer, the main display erupted with new activity. Hundreds of ships from across the galaxy had assembled for this battle, the combined fleets of every major civilization. Sleek human vessels flew alongside the massive warships of the Voltron Empire. The crystalline craft of Princess Lyra's people gleamed next to the advanced technology ships from Princess Nova's worlds. But as impressive as the fleet looked, David knew that conventional weapons would be useless against enemies that existed, partially outside normal space-time. "Attention all ships," Admiral Foster's voice carried across the communication channels. "Princess Kira and her people will coordinate our attack patterns. I know this is unlike any battle we've ever fought, but these are unlike any enemies we've ever faced. Trust in the Athonians and follow their lead." Kira activated her own communication system, speaking directly to the 200 Athonian volunteers positioned throughout the fleet. "My people, this is the moment our ancestors prepared us for. Remember, we are not fighting for conquest or glory. We are fighting for the right of all life to continue existing." Through the dimensional link that connected all phasing Athonians, David could hear the responses of Kira's people. Kai was aboard a Voltron battleship, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "Ready, Princess. The crew here is nervous, but they trust us." Luna's voice came from a Crystal Empire vessel. "The defensive positions are set. We can sense the void wraiths approaching through the dimensional barriers." Elder Thane, despite his age, had insisted on joining the fight from the flagship's sister ship. "Princess, the ancient songs are coming back to me. I remember melodies my great-grandmother sang that I haven't thought about in decades." The main display suddenly shifted, showing something that made everyone on the bridge gasp. The void wraiths weren't just dark shapes anymore. As they approached the fleet, they began to take visible form, writhing masses of shadow that seemed to absorb and twist the light around them. They moved like living smoke, constantly shifting and changing. And there were thousands of them. "All ships, maintain formation," Admiral Foster commanded, though David could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "How do you fight an enemy that normal weapons can't touch?" That's when Kira stepped forward and began to sing. It wasn't the humming practice sessions that David had witnessed during training. This was something deeper, older, more powerful. The song of Between poured from her lips with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Across the fleet, every Athonian joined their voice to hers. The combined song created something extraordinary. A harmonic frequency that bridged the gap between normal space and the dimensional planes where the void wraiths traveled. Suddenly, the enemy became fully visible in normal space. The writhing shadows solidified into forms that the fleet's weapons could actually target. But more importantly, the Athonians could now engage them directly. "Now," Kira called out, and 200 Athonians simultaneously shifted into full dimensional phase. What happened next was like watching a battle fought in multiple realities at once. The Athonians flowed between dimensional planes, striking at the void wraiths in spaces where normal matter couldn't exist. Meanwhile, the conventional fleet focused their fire on the creatures that had been forced into normal space by the dimensional singing. David watched in amazement as Kai appeared and disappeared around a massive void wraith each time he phased. Back into visibility, another section of the creature dissolved into nothingness. Luna and her team worked together like a perfect dance, their combined efforts trapping groups of enemies in dimensional loops where they couldn't escape or attack. But the battle was far from easy. Several Athonians cried out in pain as they pushed their abilities beyond safe limits. Some became lost between dimensions, their voices fading from the shared link as they drifted too far from normal space. "Princess," Elder Thane's voice carried both urgency and pride. "I can see them now, the memories of the ancient battle. Our ancestors didn't just fight these creatures. They found their source, the place where they spawn in the dark between galaxies." Kira's eyes widened with understanding. "That's why they're angry. They're not just attacking randomly. They're trying to prevent us from finding their origin point again." David felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. Kira, what if this isn't about fighting them off? What if it's about ending the threat permanently? Before Kira could respond, something changed in the battle. The void wraiths began to retreat, pulling back toward the edge of the galaxy. But instead of relief, David felt a growing sense of dread. "They're not giving up," Kira said, her voice filled with realization. "They're regrouping. They're going to try a different approach." Admiral Foster looked confused. "Princess, we're winning. The enemy is retreating." "No," Kira replied, her dimensional senses picking up something the others couldn't perceive. "They're going back to get reinforcements. This was just a scouting force." The magnitude of that statement hit everyone at once. If thousands of void wraiths constituted just a scouting force, what would the main army look like? David moved to stand beside his wife, taking her hand as she maintained her dimensional awareness. "Kira, you said your ancestors found their source before. Can you sense where that might be?" Kira closed her eyes, reaching deeper into the dimensional spaces than she ever had before. When she opened them again, her expression was a mixture of fear and determination. "I can find it," she said quietly. "But it's not going to be a battle we can fight with fleets and weapons. It's going to require something else entirely." "What?" David asked. Kira looked around at the faces on the bridge. Human, alien, all united in their determination to survive. "It's going to require trust. Trust between species that have never worked together before. Trust in abilities that we're still learning to use. And trust in the idea that sometimes the weakest person in the room is actually the strongest." David smiled, understanding finally dawning on him. "You're talking about more than just the Athonians, aren't you?" "I'm talking about all of us," Kira replied. "Every species, every world, every individual who's been overlooked or underestimated. The void wraiths feed on isolation and fear, but they can't consume unity and hope." As the fleet regrouped and prepared for what was to come, David reflected on the choice he had made months ago. Everyone had thought he was crazy for choosing the weakest alien princess. But weakness and strength weren't what they appeared to be. He had chosen Kira not despite her apparent limitations, but because of the strength she showed in overcoming them. And in doing so, he had helped awaken a power that might just save everything they held dear. The real battle was still ahead of them. But for the first time since this all began, David felt genuinely hopeful about their chances.